Hello everyone and welcome back to juicescrack.com. This is Andrew BalugaWhale Sideman back with another video on playing some 6-max on Party Poker. I sort of haven't played on Party in a long time, and so we're just going to kind of mess around with it a little bit, playing 100 no limit, and got two 6-max tables going on. We're going to stick with two tables. I've got a third table on the side over here, and we're just going to be playing HUDless because I haven't really been I haven't done too much on Party in the first place. I don't think my HUD is even set up, and besides, I think that I read something about PokerStars taking away HUDs and HUD material and stuff like that. And so that's definitely interesting. On the right table, this is actually kind of interesting. A spot where against the button limper, who limp calls, there's a good chance that we are still ahead here, and I think we can probably bet for value, although it is somewhat thin value. I'm going to go ahead and barrel this turn with my king high flush draw on the left table. We see bet the flop, basically expecting that this guy's kind of a fish here. Although I don't really think we're going to be able to get our opponent to fold a queen on that card. So I think we probably have to give up, but the turn barrel is almost certainly fine. And again, just sort of an unfortunate part of his range that we're up against there. Like, there's sort of a few things that he might fold the river with. But even then, that's probably one of them he would fold the river with. But there's only a few things like that in the range. So I don't feel too bad about showing down and losing there. Again, if he's calling there with ace-5 of spades, he's calling there with ace-5 of diamonds, which is also the kind of thing that he's folding on the turn for sure. So, again, we look kind of silly, but most of his range there is probably going to be including top pairs, things like that he's probably unlikely to fold once all the flush draws miss. If that card on the river that completed the straight also completed the front door flush, I think it's probably a barrel. But again, we have to make sure we don't get carried away, because if we're barreling all of our spade draws on the turn and all of our straight draws, we might just have too many air hands in our range relative to the times we actually have a value hand. Although given that we are on the button, we are going to have a fair amount of value hands there as well, because we're going to have sort of everything in our range possible. So, again, a spot where we're sort of going to need to moderate our bluffiness. And again, it's been a little while since I played 100 no limit online, but I imagine that fold equity in general is still pretty much somewhat low. And so we're probably not going to find too much advantage running, narrowly unbalanced narrowly unbalanced 3-barrel bluffing kinds of things. Anyway, hopefully everyone has, it's been a little while since I've done a ghost, so hopefully this is, we can pull out something interesting. We'll sort of start the way we normally start, which is by looking around at our table and trying to do a little bit of table dynamics or player identification. We can see this Adrian 2012 is limping out of the gun. This Canoes guy has been limping a number of times. We've sort of seen him limp, I think, in the previous hand, or in a previous hand. And then these other players here, this Luigi, Don't Stop, and Ehler, Mahler, both all seem like they're kind of regulars. This Don't Stop seems to be kind of a regular-ish raise size, trying to isolate a fish limping out of the gun. So these guys all seem like they're likely to be regs. And then on this right table over here, Lone Star appears to be a fish, and so does this Miha 1971 Chuck guy. But it remains to be seen sort of how Keksulia, Luigi 99 and So Damn Lucky are the sort of Luigi 99's on both tables, so we think that he's probably a regular. So Damn Lucky has just kind of a regular-ish sounding name, as well. So does Don't Stop over here. So I'd be kind of surprised if they were anything other than regulars. But that's still a couple of fish, looks like, per table, which is good hunting. We'll feel okay about that. Making sure that you actually maintain your good table selection is becoming increasingly important in the online game from the students that I work with. It's pretty obvious who's a fish and who's not a fish. And it's also pretty clear that there's like fewer games that are super fish dense now than there were once upon a time. So making sure that you don't end up in kind of, I wrote about this in my book, something called the tilt cycle, which is basically you play in bad games, your win rate goes down, your variance goes up. And when your variance goes up, you tilt more often. When you tilt more often, you tend to chase and play in bad games and things like that. There ends up being kind of like this reinforcing cycle that sort of starts with bad table selection. So I'm obviously going to go ahead and see bet my flush draw there against a fish. There's sort of some interesting thoughts about the sizing of that. Now, normally against a fish like that, your sizing would be relatively small. You would essentially be just trying to get your opponent to fold air. But then you can sort of make some other corollary here, which is, well, can we make a pot really big so that when we hit a flush, we win a giant amount? I tend to still side on kind of like it's more okay to make it big when you are when you have that kind of outs or that kind of equity. But in general, I would still sort of prefer to keep it around half pot against a fish in that spot. Interesting hand happened a second ago between Kelsukya and I'm making it 3x here on the button. That's probably a little bit big, but what can you do? I want my replayer back. I get jacks again. Back we go. Okay, so we have... Sorry, on the side table. We have Kelsukia raises, and I think makes an open-ended straight draw. I'm going to 3-bet this for value against this fishy player here. Makes an open-ended straight draw, and then looks like 3 barrels on the turn, and then 3 barrels on the river, and gets called by the runner-runner 2 pair. So we know now a little bit that this is interesting. We know now that I'll go ahead and raise it up for value here. This might be a little bit of a large raise, but it's really just going to treat this $3 bet as a C bet. We know that Keksulia can put in some action as a bluff now. That's going to be good for us to know. He bet 3 streets in a spot that was like somewhat okay to bet 3 streets, although it's just too often that somebody just barrels any 2 cards with an ace on the turn. And so if that's the case, like, it's just too often that somebody either like peels the flop with an ace or just chooses not to fold. It's also not super like all that likely that he's betting all of his aces on the flop in the first place. So his bet, his sort of turn and river bet seem to be kind of just positionally based. Or kind of just based on his opponent not being a great hand reader. Now, we never really get to know whether or not his opponent is a great hand reader because he makes 2 pair, and it becomes a very, very easy call on the river once you make 2 pair. But it would be interesting to know what he did if he, let's say, didn't make 2 pair, or if he had, let's say, a pair of 8s on the flop instead of turning a pair of aces. Because the idea of going bet there really does imply kind of a stronger range of hands than he's likely to have given his position on the button. This is one thing that you see all the time in like early teachings of poker, or people who are first learning how to play poker, is there's a lot of success barreling against weak players when overcards come. Kind of you have this idea of pot equity plus fold equity is aggression, and if your opponents are really sensitive to scare cards, if that increases their fold equity, then then you would want to just barrel on all the scare cards. Now the problem with this is that certain so-called scare cards really aren't as scary. They won't cause your fold equity to go up as much if you're playing against a good hand reader. So anyway, I've raised Queen 10 over here on my side table on the button. I got called by both blinds. And I'm making a less than half pot c-bet, expecting kind of to get really straightforward play on both sides. And I get the this person here to call, and he checks. I'm going to bet very small here because I think he probably has an ace the majority of the time, and he may have a smaller spade, but I'm sort of going to bet very small. And imagine here with the second nut spade that I'm probably against a fishy player going to be able to get like a pretty good river bet paid off. Once he becomes aggressive, that's a little bit sketchy. I kind of would expect him to raise the nuts if he had them on the turn. I'm going to bet this on the left table because this person is kind of a fish, and I'll raise this for value over there. I'm going to go ahead and just call this instead of raising. It is a little bit unlikely that he's bluffing there, but he bets half pot. I've got too good of a price. It is a little scary because the board pairs, but I don't really think that we're likely to be behind often enough there to fold given that price. I'm barreling this turn because it's an overcard and I've got equity. And then even though this is sort of one of those stars kind of aligning spots where I'm going to bet the river as well and just hope my opponent doesn't have a flush because I expect him to fold basically all pairs below the jack. and it's sort of pretty rare for him to have a jack. So again, one of the benefits of just kind of raw aggression, using that pot equity and fold equity combination, is you don't even necessarily need to capitalize on your equity if the board sort of becomes something that's scary. Now again, that's a spot where a thinking player might not actually fold a pair because I kind of look like I have any two cards. Like, it's not super likely. I mean, I guess I could have a jack. I could bet a jack on two streets, and I could certainly have kings that got there. But I might just have like all kinds of other random things that are just betting purely because overcards have fallen on turn and river. Granted, those become high variance call downs if you choose to make them, but they're probably still okay. One quick note here, I raise queen, and I get called by a fish, and then I take a squeeze from a guy who's probably regular. This is a spot where if your opponents are extremely loose and aggressive, you have like a pretty good hand to, I'm actually going to check this back given the stack sizes. You have a pretty good hand to 4-bet, but again, we're playing a 100 limit where people are pretty unlikely to be doing anything like that. So I'm going to just flat here and just induce action. If he bets, I pretty much am going to call no matter what he bets on this river. But if he makes it that size, I'll probably make it a little bit bigger and just go for value. I think he can call me with jacks, nines, things like that. Anyways, you could definitely make an argument for folding my queen high flush there when the board pairs and he bets. I don't think he's super likely to have too many full houses. He could have ace nine. I suppose you could have some sets. The fact that I bet so small on the turn makes me think that he might do something silly. And again, we're getting a pretty good price, and we don't really have like a ton of information, but you could definitely make some arguments for folding the river there. In fact, the more I think about it, the more I think I probably should have folded the river. So we have ace 10 here. I was sort of hoping that Kexula would raise. I'm going to make this 3x on the button to try to get more value from Sophus. A hand like this really goes up in value against a player like Kexula, who we have seen can fire like lots of barrels with draws. Sort of as we saw, being able to make a strong showdown value hand, or even getting the showdown with ace high, is going to increase in value the more aggressive your opponent is. And a hand, sort of subsequently, a hand that makes a showdown value hand less often is going to be less valuable. So, like a suited connector type of hand is going to be less valuable the more crazy and wild your opponent is. Just because you're not going to make a showdown hand that often, and you're going to end up kind of in a pissing contest, who can bluff the most against a guy who apparently likes to bluff a lot. Now, again, we only saw the one hand, so we don't need to draw like excessive conclusions from just from the mere fact that he was so aggro that one time. But I think that it's probably not unreasonable to assume that he's probably one of the more aggressive players at the table, given that he fired 3 with just an open-end straight draw that missed. And again, we're sort of like, we haven't learned too much yet about what's going on. We know this guy's just kind of a fishy player. If I thought these guys were like super crazy aggressive, I might justify like limping king queen here, as you've seen me do in mid stakes and high stakes videos in the past. But I think that probably at these stakes, people aren't that aggressive. They're probably not playing, they're not defending enough hands on the button relative to my open, or in the blinds relative to my button opens. So my guess would be that we're probably better off just opening any 2 cards on the button at this point, and then making them larger when up against fishy players in the blinds. So I'll 3x on the button with Jack 10 here. This should incline Luigi99 to 3-bet a bit more often, but by the same token, this presence of the big blind fish should make him want to call more often. So I'm not too worried about, and also he just may not be good enough to adjust with any kind of rapidity. I've got on the side table over here, we've got a button or under the gun limper, and we've got this aggressive guy raising on the button. This seems like a very good spot to essentially re-squeeze. He's going to be opening extremely wide on the button there. We obviously have a hand with a fair amount of equity, and it's unlikely, I think, given that this person is someone we know is really aggressive, that they're actually all that strong. That said, 4-bets at this stakes are not usually super likely to be bluffs. This is probably a player who might be able to do it, but probably until further notice, we're going to be waiting for stronger hands to get it in there. I think that if I had jacks, I probably would get them in there. Tens is actually kind of a little bit iffy, even against somebody that has bluffed once, just because they it is sort of small stakes, and it's sort of not like likely that someone is that crazy aggressive. So this would normally be an okay spot to squeeze with fours, especially against a guy who we think plays fit or fold a lot. But the problem is that his stack size is so low that he's sort of near what I would term the shove threshold, where he no longer really has the right price to call and try to fold post flop. He's just going to end up just folding a lot. Either just folding a lot pre-flop, which is fine, or just shipping it in a lot. And knowing kind of this guy's point of view at the moment, I would imagine he'd be just shipping it in a lot. Now, that said, as far as opening, we're still kind of at the right stack sizes that we need to open. Now, this might be a little bit too loose, probably is a little bit too loose because this is a regular in the blinds, I think. But this player has played extremely tightly, so I'm not quite ready to say, okay, that's, this guy is going to give me too much trouble to open to isolate. Not a great board for me to c-bet. But obviously a fine board for me to ship it in there on the turn. And we have equity in the event that this should have been a larger raise on the left to isolate this guy. And we have equity in case we get called, but we get there super hard. Yay. Tough to say what my opponent had. Yeah, earned an achievement for winning a pot at Showdown with a straight. Well, they're definitely going to... I think this is a new player here who's posting. I think I'm going to prefer to flat here and play with this guy behind. Mostly because I think I can get more mistakes to be made out of what might be a fishy player. And also, like, there's no harm in, like, delaying my value until later streets. Now, obviously, like, in general, we'd want to get value pre-flop, but that's okay. Here is a definite float where we just may have the best hand a lot. We have backdoor draw to the nuts, or to the clubs, rather. And we just, like, our pair outs are super good, and there are also cards that are just super likely to get bluffed. This is a spot where I'm actually, like, had we had more information about this person, who, again, I don't think has played very many hands, we might actually want to continue on more and just rep clubs on the river. Also, our opponent could have, like, potentially a number of, draws here worse than us. But that said, small stakes, again, I'm just going to default to playing, to calling less often, making fewer big bluffs. That's a spot where you could really conceivably flat turn there and plan on just shipping in any club river, and maybe even shipping in any heart river against kind of an aggressive opponent who's going to be unbalanced with too many thin value bets and things like that. That said, we haven't really seen this player do very much yet, so tough to say. Now, we should go find out what our opponent had on that hand where we sucked out. He had a set of aces. Well, that would be too bad for him. Oops. Not really expecting... Oh, he bought back in. That's probably good. He's probably tilting like crazy. Not really too often expecting the guy who limps every other hand to get aces, limp call them, flat them, spike set. Indeed, I was drawing poorly. I was drawing quite poorly. One of the things that I sort of want to focus on with this video is trying to understand kind of the difference between limited or short-term context and larger-term context. So what I mean by that is, in the short-term context, Kexulia has been kind of aggressive. He 4-bet me once on the other table. He bluffed against this Luigio guy. He's been obviously opening a fair amount of hands. But in the sort of larger sense, there hasn't really, like, you can't really have an expectation too much that somebody is going to be showing down, like, is going to be too aggressive at these stakes. Now, even that one hand that he showed off as a bluff, it was sort of like an okay hand, like certainly a hand that would definitely be a standard double barrel. And you could make decent arguments for it being an okay hand to be three barreling as well. So we're not totally sure he's that aggressive. We haven't really seen kind of enough evidence of bad aggressivity to do something too crazy against him, or something like that. Looks like I'm lagging somehow right now on this table. It's too bad. I don't understand. I would really like to re-raise my ace king on that table, but it just folded me instead. It's pretty sad. So definitely going to go ahead and re-raise our our ace jack here. For value against this guy who not only do we see him limp aces before, so that sort of takes a little bit of juice out of his preflop raising range, but he's the kind of guy who's likely, he already called one of our 3-bets out of position before. He's the kind of guy that we could get a lot of value from. I think I almost should make it bigger than 7 there against him. Oh, here's the table they made me fold my ace king. Sad. But anyways, it's like we talk about this when we're thinking about how to play against bad aggressive players. There's sort of this tendency where if you see one bluff or if you see like some crazy action to kind of lump them into that category, you really need kind of some more definitive action to say, okay, this person is definitely like the kind of crazy bluffer that I can sort of adjust my game significantly to be exploitative against. Most of the time we have to think about the larger context, which is, are people in general really that loose? And if you actually go ahead and look at some of the numbers, you'll see that most players here probably are not playing anywhere near aggressively enough to justify kind of taking super bold counter lines like light 4-bets or narrow floats to make bluffs on turns or rivers or things like that. Most of the time the ranges just aren't wide enough. So it's usually a good thing to do to just sort of like, my sort of classic example would be, let's just say hypothetically that interesting. Let's just say hypothetically that a player is 3-betting you, 10% of the time. That feels like a lot. I mean, as a generally like kind of a relatively high 3-bet, probably most players at small stakes aren't 3-betting anywhere near 10%. But even if you really boiled it down, like 5% of hands is pocket tens plus essentially. So if you're really thinking about it, like that's very few. Like that's basically 50% bluff, 50% value bets, which is generally like a bad range to play into too much because like value hands tend to be extremely strong. Whereas bluffs tend to have sort of similar equity. This is definitely a 3-bet for value against Kexula. Guy has been kind of continually, he's been playing pretty loosely. We sort of had these sort of situations before. I think this is also probably a bet for value on the flop against him. This might be a little bit thin, and obviously we have no backdoors, which is very unfortunate. But I really do think that he'll call with probably any ace high here. As well as maybe a lot of broadways with one heart kind of situations. So I think this is a spot where we can definitely see bet for value. He may fold some things that just completely miss, like 10-9 suited or something like that, which I would more or less expect him to have in his range. Here's a spot where I flatted pre-flop with ace queen. I'll try to bring up this replayer here a second ago, because this is a little bit of an interesting hand. Under the gun, so there's under the gun limped, and then under the gun +1 raised to 3, and I decided to flat to keep the limper in. And then I ended up with one of these classic multi-way pots where you have a value hand, and I took kind of the default line, which is to bet close to pot into the fish, and I got called by the preflop raiser, and I decided to check the river, which in retrospect might not have been the right play, although I'm not totally sure I can get value from that many worse hands. Like, I think he may call with ace-jack, and it is small stakes, so I probably should bet here. He's also raising from mid-position, so it's not likely he has too many flush cards in his range. He could have, like, some big combo draws, which he may even raise on the flop a good portion of the time. He probably should. But most of the time, he should have, like, ace-jack here or something like that. Is it not going to show me what he has? It's too bad. Thought it would. I guess we didn't get a showdown. We did get a showdown though. Should tell me what he has. I don't know. Oh well. Anyway, sort of. The idea there is I probably should have bet the river, just with the understanding that my opponent probably is A, probably likely to call too much, and B, is probably unlikely to have too many value hands better than mine, because he probably would likely to have raised ace king. Or something like that earlier. He also probably doesn't have too many draws given a position. So when you are constructing your opponent's range, you kind of need to be thinking not just about what he could he have in general, but what could he have in this particular spot? Like what would he raise in this position to isolate the fish with? What would he call two barrels with? And my sort of thought there was if he had a hand like Ace Jack, I thought he'd be relatively likely to fold it on the river, which in retrospect was kind of probably not correct. He's probably the kind of person who'd be likely to not fold it. I'm going to raise this for two reasons. Number one, this player over here in the blinds is fishy, and I sucked out on him, so he's probably likely to play bad against me. And number two, I'm deep with both him and especially with this player over here, this Luigio guy. I'm going to bet pretty small here. I think that I'll basically get a fit or fold response from my opponent on that type of board, and I'm able to get away with a pretty cheap stealing c-bet there. I mean, again, thinking with regards to bet size, thinking about what your opponent's sort of general strategy looks like, it's okay to sort of tip your hand and be reveal, kind of what the strength of your hand is if it's against somebody who doesn't really care. So it's kind of okay to bet $3 or even $2.5 against this guy when I have a blank, and when I make a set of, make a set or something like that, to bet massively on that board, because if he has an ace or if he has air, he's going to do the same either way regardless of my bet sizing. The terminology for this would be price sensitivity. Basically, bad players tend to be very price insensitive, and so you can kind of get away with betting stuff that's like, that sort of reveals the strength of your hand, or that might be better for your hand in general, because your opponent's not really going to change his strategy based on that. Whereas a good player is really likely to change his strategy based on the odds you're providing to him. So I'm going to 3-bet this ace-queen suited against Keksulia again. We're a little bit deep, but not much. And I'm going to give up on this board against this guy here. So I think that given our depth, we can probably go ahead and fire out kind of big here. We do look like pretty polarized there. Obviously, if Kixel has a queen, we're going to get it all, but he may just decide to call down like hero call with lots of stuff. This is a great card for us to barrel. Our opponent's likely to have lots of things that are basically like pair plus flush draw, like pocket tens plus flush draw kind of thing. If he has a flush here against our trip queens with nut kicker, that's pretty sad. And we also have a fair amount of equity there. I don't really expect him to continue with a hand like pocket eights with no, let's see, who am I playing against here? I don't really expect him to continue with a hand like with pocket eights with no spade, but I'm probably not going to get any more money from that type of hand anyway. We have a gutter here, but this board is kind of favorable to my opponent's range. Ideally, he's probably playing. Generally, players play a little too tightly from the blinds against button opens at small stakes. So my guess would be that he's just a little bit too likely to have a king here. Obviously, we could expect to get him to fold, a 5 or a 4, and I would certainly bet it if it was the queen of spades. But I think more likely than not, our opponent just has a king here a little bit too often because he's probably playing a little bit too tightly pre-flop. The looser that our opponent gets pre-flop, the less likely he has a king there, the more we might be able to justify trying to barrel him off of something. But again, the queen is a little bit of a fake scare card. Yes, it is higher than the board, but no, it's unlikely if we just spike to bear queen, would we keep betting. Not to mention the fact that we represent a ton of draws on that card. This is probably a fold in most circumstances, queen 10 from off from mid position with two regulars on your left, but there's a few table dynamic situations that makes me think we can play it. Basically, both of these guys have seemed to be quite sort of tight, and we're deep and have history with both these guys on our right, so I think it's probably worth it there. And I'm going to go ahead and put in a value raise here with my king-queen suited, even though I'm kind of forcing out this guy here. It's just too likely that this player has got like a really wide range of hands. It's also somewhat likely that the fish just may overcall. This seems like it might actually be a good spot to just put in a raise for some essentially like two-way bet bluff kind of thing. My opponent may just call and check fold a lot, it would seem. It is only the minimum raise. It just seems like we can be aggressive there against that. Again, really just focusing on ramping up our aggression when it doesn't seem like our opponent has a lot of strong hands, and definitely trying to play as often as we can against weaker players. So I just 3-bet a second ago. I'm inclined to just flat this time with this hand and to flop the nuts. again, because this player's kind of tight, I'm going to give up on that board. I'm going to check here and go for a check raise against him. Now, obviously, this is a spot where my opponent has lots of hands that he is just going to give up with, and the board texture is just kind of going to make that a reality. There's a number of hands that are just going to be impossible for us to actually get too much money in against. But that's a good sign that he's betting that. So I'm actually going to go ahead and check raise kind of large here, and just see if we can get some money in the pot. I'm going to raise this sort of mini donk bet there. It looks like our opponent just has a very strong hand here, so I'm going to just keep on firing big. On the right table, I'll give up, though, because I didn't hit any of my cards. I wasn't really ever trying to barrel too often. And we lose, again, to one of the hands we probably could have gotten him to fold, but that's okay. We won't be results-oriented. And again, I'm not really trying. I don't really expect my opponent to have. My opponent may have some draws there, but at that point, another thing to remember about a board like the one I'm about to show you from the previous hand, definitely check that. Where is it? Okay. Another thing to remember about. Nope, that's the wrong one. Hey, we made two pair. We checked the flop here, basically expecting our opponent to have kind of a range advantage in a lot of cases against us. Mostly because he calls from the cutoff, not from the button, so his range should just be a little bit tighter. I'll try to dig up this hand. See if I can find it. I want to show you like the board texture that I'm talking about. Oh yeah, in terms of draws. So, get rid of this thing for a second. So we look at this for a second here, and we see even if our opponent has, let's say, a diamond draw, well, a ton of these diamond draws are going to be massive. They're going to be the Queen X of diamonds. They're going to be something like King Jack or Ace Jack of diamonds. They're going to have a ton of outs or think they have a ton of outs. They're going to be a hand like even like 8-9 of diamonds. There's sort of a few of these, but even like Ace 9, Ace 6 are all going to think they have more outs than they do. So there's sort of very few hands that I expect him to actually fold to aggression on the turn here. Maybe a hand like Ace 10. But Ace 10, we were going to have to dodge a ton of sort of danger turn cards to get more action in this hand. Like, we basically have to dodge 9s, Jacks, Queens, Kings, Diamonds to get any value from Ace 10. So really, I think we're better off, again, kind of taking the beat them over the head with a hammer line and just trying to get as much value into the pot as fast as we can. The old double your bet size, double your win rate thing, I think still may be true in many cases. Probably not as true as it once was, but probably likely to still be pretty true. Anyways, probably play for another 15 minutes or so and then call it good. I'm going to raise this on the left table for value, and we'll definitely... so again, this is a spot where we should, by raising him in position, we should actually probably have a range advantage over him here. Basically, like, we should be taking stronger things to battle here. And now that he can't have Queen 10 and probably doesn't have Ace King, this is kind of a crappy draw, but we can probably still bet it. I kind of like overbetting this. Basically because, like, we can have really strong things here that he probably can't have. Like, there's a lot of sets and things like that that he probably can't have, as well as the nuts, which he probably can't have. And because we're deep, it makes sort of an extra level of believability that we're just trying to go for sort of the maximum amount of value. And we're probably not going to have too many bluff hands that are going to be able to do that like that. So we're kind of in a spot where we can really go for maximum fold equity. And our opponent would actually probably be correct to fold even a hand like 2-pair Ace Jack there is probably correct to fold against that type of bet. So that does some good things for us to be able to bluff him off of something as strong as Ace Jack. Or even, I mean, honestly, you could even make a justification for our opponent like folding Ace King there. This seems like a call because we just have the best hand a huge portion of the time in this blind versus blind battle. Our opponent's basically representing a deuce, which is possible but not extremely likely. Or a king, which there are a number of kings, it's true. But now on this particular turn, our opponent is repping like a lot of random flush draws, a number of straight draws, Ace 4, Ace 5, 4, 5, 4, 6, 5, 6. So I think we can probably peel one more time. And our opponent just may have. I mean, he may. There's a sort of a number of kings here, and only a few deuces. But I kind of would be surprised to see my opponent three barrel with all but like pretty good kings. Um, it seems like not super likely that he would have. Again, we're sort of. I'm sort of have to keep myself from playing like high stakes Andrew and play like low stakes Andrew for a second, because I think that it seems like our opponent should have a lot of bluffs here, but also it's like small stakes, so they probably don't. I probably should fold the turn at this stakes, to be totally honest. Whereas in high stakes, I think I probably call turn, call river. So my opponent's representing so many things. I'm probably getting a good price. I mean, so if it's 14 to 21 on the rivers, so I've got to call 14 to win 35. So I got to be good, like a little worse than a third of the time. Maybe 27% of the time, something like that. 28% of the time. It's tough to say. With no info, and this guy generally having been kind of not really out of line in any ways, I think you'll probably just fold. Probably should just fold the turn. To be totally honest. Anyways. So these tables are actually like kind of what I would view to be like stereotypically normal 50-cent one tables. We've got some three weaker players, some regulars, most of whom seem to be quite tight and relatively staying in line. Only one regular who seems to be getting out of line at all, which would be this Keksulia guy who wasn't even really getting that far out of line. He just 4-bet me one time in a spot where he could just totally have the nuts. I didn't even have an ace blocker, and he also three-barreled in a spot that was arguably okay to three-barrel, certainly okay to two-barrel. Granted, that is a good piece of information. We just haven't really seen anything that makes us think that we should do anything other than essentially play a normal laggy style, trying to play as many pots with big players as possible, and then make as many folds as we need to against kind of the standard regs. Anyways, I can play for 10 minutes, something like that. Decided not to raise the ISO the deuce 4, mostly because playing out of position against a fishy player oftentimes requires something more tied to fold equity. This seems like a spot where we can bet for value against an opponent that has a straight a huge portion of the time, so I'm going to bet twice the pot. I think my opponent will call me with a straight, like always. Very, very, very rarely has a flush. May have some two pairs. I kind of doubt he folds two pairs, but it's possible. But I just think he has a straight a huge portion of the time there. Or a decent portion of the time. Enough to make it worth just big bets. I was going to say, one of the reasons why I wouldn't raise the deuce 4 to ISO there, even though I think that I'm going to win with a bet and c-bet a lot, is because, or raise and c-bet, is because showdown value matters a little bit more when you're out of position, and it matters a little bit more when you're playing against somebody who folds a little bit less. So even though this is somebody who is likely to fold the c-bets a lot, when they don't, it's a lot better to have a hand like King 4 than it is to have Deuce 4. Obviously, but it sort of makes a big difference because the King is actually going to come into play kind of a large portion of the time. You kind of need that extra ability to win at showdown, which you don't really get with Deuce 4. Unless you spike a flush, like me. How mad is this guy about that Queen 7 hand? He's probably pretty mad. He's probably not feeling very good about it. I'll probably raise the 8 deuce just because I think these guys are playing too tightly in the blinds. But now that this guy limps, we're going to have to give up. This is another kind of guy. Even though we're in position this time, this hand is just too weak to do anything too special with it. And obviously, once other players get involved, it's kind of, the story is kind of over for us. This hand, on the other hand, is one we will probably play. I will fold this if... I'm not going to 3-bet against Miha's under the gun raise. I'm a little bit... it is justifiable to think about doing that. But one of the other reasons why I don't want to 3-bet there is for sort of exactly what happens here. it's easy to just imagine yourself playing just against this one player and not to think about playing against all the other three players that haven't done anything yet. But each one of those has got their own 5% chance of binking something very, very, very strong. And so that's actually like, if you do it statistically, it's like probably like, I don't know, I haven't off the top of my head, but a little bit more than 15% of the time that somebody has like a really good hand would be my sort of rough guess. I'll fold that. And so you kind of have to remember that you're not just playing against this range here, you're playing against these other ranges. Now, if I was on the button, it probably swings a little bit closer to being a 3-bet for value. Interesting. We get kind of snapped 4-bet by this AA8088 guy. Again, not a whole lot we're going to be able to do there. We're sort of have a depolarized range, which we think is still almost certainly correct to have a depolarized range there. And just to be going for value against this fishy guy, it will take a long way to get before this guy enters out of line territory. Normally this would be a great spot for us to be value betting, but this is actually kind of interesting. Do we think that we'll make, if we're 22.5 to 1, I think that's what we are, 22.5 to 1 to hit a 2-outer, but probably like only one of our 2-outs is really good. We need to make $20 if we hit our set here. I don't think we do. Assuming that we're behind, which I think once we get a bet and a call, we're just certainly behind. We could, in theory, try to bluff him off of something, but probably not. If we had the 10 of diamonds, we definitely peel there. Yeah, for whatever reason, I think it's probably unlikely we're going to get Miha to actually fold that type of thing. So again, against an under-the-gun open here, we're definitely going to be very inclined to fold unless Miha comes along, in which case it's probably too good to... it's probably too good to not squeeze. The value is probably just too good against Miha. Even though Sudden Lucky has been quite tight, the value is probably just too good. This is a spot where we can kind of juice the pot a little bit on the left. Even though we're trying to get him to fold like lots of air things, we also can get him to fold maybe some pairs by just betting a little bit bigger there. And obviously we're equity-wise are solid against everything. So I have accidentally been kicked off of my other table. The daily major is starting in 9 minutes. Kind of wonder how big that is. I haven't really been on Party Poker in quite a while. I was on the WPT network, which shut down. That was too bad. Anyway, we'll play one more orbit, and then we'll call it good. Interesting sort of dynamic, sort of relatively soft tables. I guess the things to take away from it are bet sizing, for value, especially large. Think about range versus range. Do we have a range advantage here or do we not? Think about like your bet sizing in terms of exploitative play. Like, am I really worried about my opponents knowing what I have? Maybe this race is a little bit too big. This guy actually has been pretty tight, even though he's been passive. He's probably kind of tight passive. Unfortunately for him, I'm running pretty good today. I think my opponent probably doesn't hit this board all that often, but it may have something like 10s, 9s, 10s, jacks, decent portion here. So I probably should not have raised so big pre-flop. Probably should have even thought about limping behind. But it's really tough to know what a bad passive player's range actually looks like. I'm going to come behind here with a flat. This is again under the gun raise. I don't think it means too much to this guy, but this is on the left is kind of interesting because a lot of the hands that I kind of thought that we would be able to get it in with comfortably are probably not like that happy to see that turn card. We can bet this for value against Miha. He'll call with lots of queens and jacks, one would assume. Not going to be happy betting this against the other guy, though. So the question here is, how can we set up stacks on the river and still get the value we need? And we have to keep betting for value, almost certainly. Like it's too likely our opponent just has some hand that we're going to be able to get value from. But or let me put it this way: it's too unlikely that if our opponent has a hand like, let's say, 10s or jacks, that he's ever going to actually like put a bunch of money in the pot with it. We're better off just gunning for the times when he check called the flop with some random ace, or get stubborn with 10s and jacks. So I think that even though that's an unfortunate turn card for us, we don't really have a better option than continuing to bet. Not to mention if he has a hand like tens or jacks, he's got kind of a lot of outs against us. He's drawn to a solid 8-outer. This is a spot where I would prefer to bet small as my bluff. Again, kind of playing fit or fold. Our opponent's playing fit or fold against us. But it's a spot where obviously we have a little bit more equity. Against maybe somebody who's playing less fit or fold, I might turn that into more of a piece of my more aggressive range. And we will sit out on the next big blind. This will be like our last hands. Tears. Anyway, hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video. I appreciate you guys watching. This has been Andrew, BalugaWhale Sideman with a ghost video. Again, only here on deucescrack.com. I will see you guys all next week. Leave a comment down in the thread, but until then, good luck.